Hey guys, just wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to SiDEBAR Forever. If you like the show, please subscribe to us at sidebarforever.com, as well as share episodes of the podcast on your social media. That way, new listeners can find us as well. Who remembers the old Dell, Gold Key, and Charlton comics? Weird offbeat characters like Magnus Robot Fighter, Dr. Solar, and the original Blue Beetle. How about Archie Comics with its never-ending soap opera about a group of teenagers living in the fictional town of Riverdale? Well, today we discuss those publishers, their titles, and even some of the creators who worked for them on an episode we're calling Forgotten Comics. Now its publishers, Dell, Gold Key, and Charlton, shut down their presses decades ago. But in their day, they put out tons of books, mostly public domain characters like Hercules and the Werewolf, licensed TV shows such as Star Trek and The Twilight Zone, and yeah, a few original heroes like Magnus and Blue Beetle. Meanwhile, in Riverdale, Archie, Betty, Veronica, and the rest of the gang have remained in print for over 70 years. On the podcast, we discuss all of the aforementioned, including our initial impressions of these publishers as young readers, and how a lot of Gold Key, Charlton, and Archie characters live on to this very day. I'm Adrian Johnson. Take a trip down memory lane with Swain and I as we dig through long boxes, searching for back issues of Forgotten Comics.
Yeah, man, I was doing some reading and doing some thinking about our topic.
Yeah.
It's so weird to me, like thinking back on like Dell and Gold Key and even Charlton to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was a kid, I don't know if I've told the story in the show. I'm pretty sure I have. But when we lived in Chicago, there was a guy down the street named Ricky.
That's right. You've mentioned it, but please.
I have?
Yeah.
Okay. He lived down the street from us on South Vernon Avenue, south side of Chicago. And I believe he worked in a grocery store. And so, I had a few friends in the neighborhood, and they knew I liked comics. Oh, if you like comics, you need to go to Ricky's house. He got a bunch of comics. I was like, really? So, they knocked on his door. Yeah, he likes comics. He wants to see your comics. And all that, come on in. I mean, now this is 1970s. We going to some strange man's house. Just... Everything about it was wrong, but we did it,
Yeah.
And we get in, and he had comics everywhere, stacked up on the dining room table in the living room.
Wow.
Like bunches of them. He was probably stealing them from the grocery store.
Oh, okay.
There was a real popular grocery store in Chicago called Dell Farm. And he was probably stealing them from Dell Farm. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So he gave me a bunch of comics. And so, back then, I'm reading, your normal Superman, Batman, Justice League, Wonder Woman, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Ghost Rider, Defenders, just whatever's out.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember, like, the first time I saw, like, Dell and Gold Key, where it was just like what is this? What I mean? Like, you were immediately aware, like, looking at the comics, like, the artwork was kind of, blander. The colors were kind of drabber and kind of desaturated in a way, and the covers, they had, a lot of them had like painted covers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But those covers were more akin to like the covers from like paperback sci-fi novels from like the 60s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was more like that. I mean, it was like, I was like, this must be what the settlers in the United States, what they read as comics, or, these are the comics they gave the slaves to read. So it just was like so foreign from mainstream comics.
Yeah.
But then, later on, as I really became a deeper fan of comics and all that, I kind of started to kind of appreciate them for the charm that they had.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of one-offness and the kind of off-brandness of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what was your experience?
All right, so yeah, basically my experience was like you would see them always in the bargain bin, the cutout bin.
Yeah.
You go to the shop, just for a quarter and everything. But when I got into the hobby though, I knew about more Gold Key and Dell's by way of, and Charlton's by way of, you probably can sympathize with this. When you're making checklists of your favorite artists.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And you start collecting like, oh man, they did this and this and this. And then you come across like, for instance, let's take John Byrne, for instance. All right. John Byrne, you go through his early work before he really started landing consistent work at Marvel. Mm-hmm. There's stuff from Charlton like Doomsday +1, Chopper and the Wheelie Bunch, Emergency, that old TV show.
Yeah.
He did an adaptation of that, you know what I'm saying? And it was just like, wow. And you're thinking like, man, well, I got to have everything, so I got to track these down.
That's it.
And then later on, with Gold Key in particular, Frank Miller's first work, his first
Twilight
work.
Zone.
Yes, Twilight Zone 84.
Yes, and I hunted it down and bought it.
Yeah. Exactly. And you look at that type of stuff and it's like, oh man, this is great because for one, it was giving a lot of these artists that we took to be superstars now, or the then present, they had to start somewhere to cut their eye teeth, to really get their feet wet into doing monthly assignments and actually, doing comics, you know what I mean?
Right.
And then on the other hand, the other charm about those comics too is like, we have independent comic companies today, but nothing like those. And what I mean is that, those comics back then, like Dell, Gold Key, Charlton, Archie, all those type of companies like that, Warren, those were comics put out and they were very accessible. It was very much unlike today to where it was on the, like as per your story, it was on grocery racks, it was, just in airports, just something to where anybody could pick them up. And, your parents might pick up a couple just to shut you up, when on a long road trip or something like, here, you know what I'm saying? And you'd be good for like an hour or two, just rereading and everything. So there's a charm to that, with those type of, those particular comics, and I know the topic, is forgotten comics, but I think for a lot of people, for a lot of readers, those comics were probably very formative, as far as like, they're so omnipresent that, that those were probably their formative, forays into reading comics rather than even the mainstream stuff from the big two. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but where the comics would come in a pack.
3-pack, yeah. Yes, sir.
So you might have like a Fantastic Four on the outside. You're trying to see, what do they got stuck in the middle? What is this? And then you buy, okay, I'm going to get Fantastic Four, and I'm going to get Ghost Rider. And then you open it up, and it was like Richie Rich in the middle, or
yes,
or Green Hornet, or Adam 12, or something like that. And you're like, God damn, they got me for my 75 cents, But like you said, to some extent, that was some people's first comics, were those comics. Mm-hmm. And I think, I don't know, I guess to a degree, like you said, you kind of eventually understood the charm of those books. And also, from going back to your story about, having a want list and trying to collect everything by a creator, a writer, an artist that you really liked. In our cases, mostly artists. Mm-hmm. But you could, so for instance, if you went back and got Emergency or Chopper or Doomsday +1, you could track on a spectrum, when did John Byrne start as a professional, and when did he kind of start becoming the John Byrne that I discovered him as?
Right, exactly.
On X-Men or whatever. And for me, I could see, okay, once he got into that Iron Fist, Marvel team-up era, that's when he started becoming the John Byrne that I started to really like. He started to kind of crystallize and really like, harden. His clay stopped being soft and wet, and he was a sculpture. He was, this, he was the statue of David, or he was the, the thinker at that point. It was there.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the importance of going back to those, and then, as Adrian mentioned, we're talking about forgotten comics, Dell, Gold, Key, Charlton, and Archie. But and I remember telling a story on the show where at Dell Farm in Chicago, I remember my father worked in the meat department.
Yeah.
So, we go to pick him up or whatever. And so immediately I'm like, where's the magazines in the comic rack? Where's that at? That's where I'm going. And I'm sitting on the floor reading comics. And I remember Creepy and Eerie.
Yeah.
And reading The Spirit on a magazine rack in a grocery store.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Just and I remember even then thinking, damn, this is the weirdest shit. This guy with this mask on and, but the artwork was so captivating. And I think even then I got a sense that the person telling the story was telling the whole story. The person was the writer, the artist, that this was coming from a singular vision. This wasn't like, hey, I got an idea of something and I pitch it to an artist and then, some production people put it together and then it comes out. I was immediately aware that this was a storyteller. I'm certain of it. I could feel it. Mm-hmm. And that's probably why I came back to The Spirit, even though The Spirit's not my favorite Will Eisner or anything. But that's probably part of the reason why I came back to it. But you mentioned earlier, you said earlier about independent comics. And I wonder if we can really even categorize somebody like Dell or Gold Key or Charlton as independent comics. Maybe in the sense of them not being Marvel or DC, but I think they had super wide distributions. I think it was either Gold or Dell Key. They had maybe even more distribution than than DC or maybe at national periodicals or whatever, or even Marvel. Over time, I think they were in like Woolworths and and everywhere, like newsstand. They were everywhere. So I wonder if we can even call them independent in the same way we would like some of the underground comics of the 70s, or some of the 80s underground comics, like Cerebus or ElfQuest, Richard and Wendy Penny, or something like that.
That's interesting. That's an interesting distinction that you made there, man. Because by that classification, you're kind of right. Because those companies, Dell, Gold Key, that we're discussing, they did have the very, very wide distribution, but also, they had a lot of licensed titles as well. Like particular, both, had like licensed titles, but like Dell started way back in like the 50s. Again, going back to the checklist.
Actually, Dell started in the 20s. They started way back in the 20s and went all the way into to 74.
Really? Oh, wow. I didn't know they went that far back. Okay.
Yeah. But go ahead and finish your point. I'm sorry.
No, you cool. Because I was going to say, you would see on checklists, especially for Alex Toth or whatnot, those Dell comics that he did for adaptations of Maverick or Bat Masterson, the Westerns,
Yeah.
the Riflemen and stuff. So Dell would have those, and then Gold Key would also do adaptations of Star Trek and Twilight Zone, obviously, and other TV shows, and they had other stuff besides those licensed, titles as well, and I guess I think of them more as independent because they were an alternative to and I wonder if people back then, you would probably be able to answer that for me. Did you just look at all of them as just comics, or did you say, well, there's Marvel and DC, and then there's these over here, the comics that we're discussing? Did you look at it that way, or just it's all comics?
No. Kind of what I was saying earlier. I felt like it was comics, and then it was these over here.
Dang.
What is this? And even Archie and Richie Rich and, Little Lotta and, stuff like that.
Yeah.
That was even something separate to me. But, the superheroes were Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
As in my nascent stage, as a in the hobby, as you put it, I was at least aware of that. And like I said, later I kind of was like, okay, I kind of fuck with Magnus Robot Fighter, yo. Because his name tells you who he is and what he does.
With them go-go boots, yo. With them.
Yes. And that one piece looking like Jack LaLanne or some shit, yo.
Yeah, yo. Them Nancy Sinatra boots. These boots are made for walking. Yeah. Doom, 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 doom.
Yeah. So I was aware of it, but yeah, just to put it on point, Dell Comics started publishing in 1929 under Dell Publishing, and then went all the way to 1974. They were established in New York, and like Adrian was saying, like Felix the Cat, Lone Ranger, Tarzan, Howdy Doody. They had licenses from like Disney and MGM, and of course Hanna-Barbera. But they also did like Frankenstein and the Wolfman, the Werewolf, and Dracula and Hercules.
Yeah.
Gold Key came along in 1962, and they published until 1984.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and of course, Magnus Robot Fighter, Green Hornet, Korak, Son of Tarzan.
Yeah, Turok, Son of Stone.
Turok, Lost in Space.
Yeah.
And then like Adam 12 and Family Affair, like you're talking about the TV shows.
Yeah.
Why do a TV? All right, just go ahead. Just do your thing. And then, Charlton came along, and Charlton has, of course, the roster of characters that we're most familiar with in, from like the 70s and in the Bronze Age and into modern day with like Captain Atom and Peacemaker.
Yeah.
Blue Beetle, The Question, Judo Master. And Peter Cannon, Thunderbolt,
There you go, yeah. hey, who published Dynamo, that Wally Wood joint? Remember Dynamo? Was it Tower Comics? Was it Tower Comics, or did they go underneath another company?
I can't remember, but I loved those books. Because I was a big Wally Wood fan.
Yes.
He had that belt. He had the belt on. I loved Dynamo, yo. I fucking loved anything Wally Wood, to be honest with you. But I can't remember. But I definitely read Wally Wood. And what was the group that he was? I mean, not Wally Wood. I definitely read Dynamo. What was the group that he was in?
Oh, Thunder Agents.
Thunder Agents, yes.
Yes.
Yes, yo. Ooh, that gets me excited thinking about that, yo. Thunder Agents, yo. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. That's some good stuff, sir. And then we would definitely want to talk about Archie Comics.
Yes.
As it relates to, Archie and Betty and Veronica and Reggie and Jughead and Sabrina and Josie and the Pussycats and Mr. Weatherby. Remember Mr. Weatherby, yo?
Mr. Weatherby, yes, sir. The principal, yes.
So, but I do remember, like you said, in the comic shops, and like now, because comics have been around so long, it's kind of like when you go to quarter bins now, you can actually find some dope shit.
Absolutely.
Because so much stuff came out, going into the 90s, the 80s and the 90s. You can find great stuff for a quarter or 50 cents or something like that, $1.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, it was trash.
Hey.
I'm just saying, when I was a kid, when I was 18,
yeah,
the quarter bins wasn't about a damn thing. I mean, because everybody was collecting. That was the height of collecting. That was the height of, checklists and, the price guide. And the price guide would show you who the creators were on the book. So I'd go to get the price guide at the comic shop, and I'd be like, okay, he did this, he did that. There was no internet. There was no way to look it up.
Yep.
So like you said, that's how I found out about Doomsday Plus One. That's how I found out about Joe Staten on E-Man.
Yeah.
That's how I found out about Steve Ditko, the co-creator of Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, worked for Charlton Comics years before, went and worked at Marvel, did Spider-Man, did Doctor Strange, kind of fell out with Stan and Marvel, and then went back to Charlton, and they revamped the Blue Beetle.
Mm-hmm.
He did his Ted Cord Blue Beetle, and then he did The Question, which is like a version of Mr. A.
Mr. A.
Mr. A, yeah. And and Captain Atom. He revamped Captain Atom, who I think was a different character before he became, the one with the atomic symbol and the gold and the red and the blue and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and all of that. But when did you first encounter Charlton? Was that before or after Watchmen? Because Watchmen was in '86.
Yes.
DC acquired the Charlton characters in '83, and so 3 years later we get, the Watchmen doppelgangers that were essentially those Charlton characters. But when did you find out about the Charlton characters?
It would definitely be much later for me because I got into, comics full on, where I was buying my own in like 93, 94.
Okay.
And then I worked my way back from that. And as we discussed, the whole thing with the checklist where you're seeing like, so-and-so did this and that. But, firsthand experience with them was actually when I was getting really, really into Jim Aparo. And I was finding out about, oh man, he drew the Phantom, and then also another great resource too was like, reading up on like interviews that, these creators would give saying, where they were talking about their career where, I stopped here, I did some work here, I did some work at Charlton. So every like 2 weeks I would have to drive up to, Derby, Connecticut to drop off my pages. Derby, Connecticut.
Yes, yo.
Yeah, man. And, I remember Jim Aparo mentioning that, and he said he loved it. He loved it because they allowed him so much freedom because the rates were not very good, compared to what he was getting with DC. But he said, he could letter his own stuff. He could draw it, pencil and ink it. And on some occasions, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was able to write a few stories as well. Just do like the whole package. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I started getting some of those issues too. I was like, man, but kind of like you said, it wasn't that tight, stuff we would know them from DC and Marvel, but it did have some type of just weird energy to it, to where like, man, you can really get a sense of, okay, they're doing this stuff for Marvel and DC, and that's one way. But then it seems like when they're doing this stuff for Charlton, they're just kind of like cutting loose.
Right.
Like with Steve Ditko too. You look at some of those comics that he did with those characters you named, and that stuff, it's just like fun. You can kind of see him like kind of the handcuffs getting taken off a little bit for him. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So when it comes to that type of stuff, yeah, that's kind of where I kind of cut my teeth with Charlton on.
Okay. I'm doing some research. I couldn't really find names for any of the artists, that we probably became fans of in the mainstream and that actually worked for Dell per se. I'm sure there were.
Oh, sure.
Some of the older guard that preceded the guys from the 80s that I became fans of, and then for yourself, guys in the 80s and the 90s. I'm sure, people who were peers of Russ Manning and Al Williamson and all that, they worked for Dell.
Oh, yeah.
At some point. But definitely like Gold Key, Dan Spiegel worked for Gold Key.
Yeah.
Russ Manning, created, I think Magnus robot fighter for
that's correct.
For Gold Key. Steve Skeets.
Oh wow, yeah.
Famous inker Mike Royer.
Mike Royer, my man.
Yeah, Jack Kirby's, one of his, other than Joe Sennett, I guess really his best inker is
the best inker, but go ahead.
All right. And Lynn Wein and Mark Evanier.
Yeah.
And then of course, Frank Miller's, I think one of his very first jobs was that Twilight Zone.
And then can I throw a couple more in there too?
Yeah.
Yeah, man. One that I want to mention is I believe it's Jesse Marsh. He drew Tarzan comics for Dell. If you look at his stuff, it is too like the layperson's eye, or to anyone's eye, it looks kind of wonky, okay? Like this Tarzan is all just real stout and everything. The musculature is just like very just, and I'm sure the average person would be like, what is he doing? Why is he drawing so messed up? And it's not messed up. Like when you really look at it, it's like this stuff is actually very, very energetic or whatnot, but it's probably done very quickly too.
Right.
But yeah, look up Jesse Marsh. He had an influence on Richard Corbin and Jaime Hernandez. You won't see it in Jaime Hernandez's stuff. You won't see it in Jaime's stuff. But he said that he was definitely a fan of Marsh's when he was a kid reading these comics. And then also you got Pat Boyette and Tom Sutton, who drew, I believe, at both Charlton and also some stuff for Gold Key as well. You know, just these guys that would kind of, don't forget Gray Morrow. You know what I'm saying?
Oh!
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Like, we just talking about, like, these solid just craftsmen, these cartoonists. You know what I'm saying? Like, when that was actually a vocation.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You would go and make the rounds of these publishers, you know? Stuff wasn't popping off at Marvel and DC. Okay, well, let me head up to Derby, Connecticut. I love saying that. Let me head up to Derby and drop my stuff off, see if they got anything. Let me head over there. Let me just make the circuit. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was a circuit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, I really miss reading those interviews and those stories about, you know, people having to turn in pages in person and going down to the offices and popping in people's, you know, they're working and people are cutting and pasting and writing and doing copy and you know, and having a face-to-face rapport with editors. And, you know, there was a certain kind of romanticism about having to be in New York where the publishers were, or in Derby, Connecticut, or in, I think in Gold Key's case, I think it was Poughkeepsie, New York.
Yes, Poughkeepsie.
You know, just all of that stuff, and having to have that, you know, that FaceTime, you know, with the people that hired you, and then, you know, something good coming from it. You know, George Pratt told those stories, you know, being in the DC offices and popping in, hey, I'd like to do some covers. Like what? You know, and he goes and grabs a piece of, you know, some copier paper or whatever and a pen and, you know, how about this? All right, cool. You know, and he's got a job, you know, and he's off to the races, you know.
Yeah.
I do miss hearing and reading those kinds of stories. And also, like, Jim Starlin didn't work for any of these publishers, but reading his interviews and reading about the independent publishers that he worked for and things that he did outside of Marvel and DC, and even stuff that he did during that period, like he did it was like a, you know, it was one of his sci-fi, his cosmic, you know, characters. I forgot the name, Dark Star or something. It was a character with a dark suit.
I know what you're talking about.
He had like a bob haircut, and then he had like stars on his body.
Yes. I know what you're talking about. I cannot get the name of it, but I see the character. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, just hearing about stuff like that, or even Chaykin, you know, working for Mike Friedrich and, you know, the very first Cody Starbuck images, you know, and so forth. But other creators, like for Charlton, like I said, I became a real fan of, I loved those Blue Beetles. I love those questions. I love Captain Atom. But other than Ditko, you know, like Dick Giordano worked for Charlton Comics. You and I talked about that in our exchange before we started recording. You know, he ended up becoming, I believe, an editor for Charlton, right?
Sure did. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Giordano was there. Frank McLaughlin.
Oh wow. Okay.
Don Newton.
Don Newton.
Don Newton, sir. Don Newton.
Woo.
The great Jim Aparo, the late great Jim Aparo.
Yes, sir.
Although quite a few people we're going to talk about here are dearly departed at this point. Denny O'Neil, he worked for Charlton. Mike Zeck eventually came on and worked for Charlton. Later on, this is way later on. Maybe like a reboot. But you know, the thing I think about all these companies that are so interesting to me is again, having cut my young teeth on superhero comics, as you probably did.
Sure.
You know, all these publishers, all these kind of second tier, you know, kind of one-off, slightly to the left or slightly to the right publishers, you know, they started in the era where genre was king and queen.
Yeah.
So, you know, they were publishing Westerns, crime, romance books, sci-fi and fantasy comics, and then eventually superheroes, you know, and you see them like, it's kind of like today where Netflix comes along and Amazon and Hulu and these streaming services who now have super deep pockets. But prior to having super deep pockets, they said, look, we've got to get subscribers, which means we've got to have content. So instead of paying all these big licenses for Friends and for The Office and for things like that, let's create our own content. So they said, okay, let's. And so what happened is genre movies went to the streaming platforms. That's where they went to live. That's why all the big studios started focusing on blockbusters and these tentpole summer spectaculars, you know, in the superhero movies. If we ain't spending $100 million on it, it ain't shit.
Okay, yeah.
And so similarly, that's kind of what they were doing, was like, okay, Marvel and DC, you know, are timely and, you know, national. They're focusing on superheroes, and all that came into the fore, I think, in a big way in the 50s during the Silver Age. So they stayed focusing on what can we make money at, spend a little money making it, and what can we make money on? Okay, let's get the license for the Gunsmoke comic.
Yeah.
Family Affair. You know, fucking Mannix. You know, you know, you know, just whatever. Let's get characters that are in public domain. Dracula and the Werewolf. Let's make those comics. You know, and as long as we have enough product out there, and you mentioned this before as a former comic book shop employee, you know, now we at least have market space on the racks. Mm-hmm. You know, we compete in some way, you know, with what they're doing, even though, again, it felt kind of, okay, a Lost in Space comic. Now I got to read about Dr. Smith, you know, being this treacherous, disloyal, you know, you know. But anyway, yeah, the fact that it was genres and how all that has basically kind of gone away is really interesting to me. And I remember my mom, I don't know if you've ever asked your mom this or your dad before he passed, but asked your parents about reading comics when they were kids. Did you?
No. And in fact, I think that's probably why they kind of looked at me getting into comics like, what? Huh?
Really?
Yeah, in fact, my mom asked me a few years ago, she was like, hey, Adrian, are you still reading them comics books? Mom, they're just comics, not comics books. They're just comics. So, oh, you still reading them? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you gotta see that. At once, that's like, cause you're her child, so she's going to be accepting, but also you can kind of sense that, oh, okay. I thought you had kind of, okay, I grew that. Like, the undercurrent of it.
Yes. Like, I was hoping you would grow out of it by the time you turn 30, but I guess that didn't happen, huh?
Oh, man.
Man, my mom gave it up a long time ago, though, yo.
Oh, yeah?
She was just like, okay. So she was with it. But as far as Archie goes, man, Archie has been around in so many different ways. Wasn't there an Archie cartoon?
Yes. In fact, there were two of them. There was one back from the late 60s. There was a Saturday morning cartoon. And they used to play reruns of that as recently as about 5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, here in Atlanta. And then there was another one that was on NBC when I was a kid. They came out in 89, 90, called just Archie, you know.
Okay.
Part of their Saturday morning lineup. And that's the one I remember. You know, I remember the little theme song. Yeah.
Okay. The only thing I remember, my earliest memories are, I knew Josie and the Pussycats came from Archie, but I remember the Josie and the Pussycats.
Yeah.
I remember that. And I liked the song. Wasn't the song Sugar Sugar by the Archies?
The group was called, yes, it was the Archies.
Honey. Yeah. But which I found out later on, that was written by some songwriters, and those people singing it were just studio musicians.
Dang.
They were not even a band, so. But those were my earliest memories. And then I do remember like going to like maybe like Woolworth or like the dime store or like, I don't know, not Weebolts. Weebolts was like a department store in Chicago, but I remember going to the store and seeing Archie Comics. I remember later on seeing those Archie digests like in the line at the grocery store, the collections. And I remember reading through those and I was like, okay, man, they're still making Archie, and reading them and kind of enjoying them.
Yeah.
They had like a superhero line. I think it was the Mighty Comics Group, MCG. And so anything where like a character who didn't have superpowers got superpowers, I was kind of on board for that. So if Lois got superpowers, or Perry White got superpowers, or Jimmy Olsen got superpowers, or if somebody else became Spider-Man, or, in World's Finest where it was like the son of Batman and the son of Superman and their friends, I was with it, I mean, that was just, sign me up. But I do remember those digests, and I remember enjoying those and reading those and buying, quite a few of them. Because, once you kind of become a comics fan, like a true blue, you'll kind of try anything. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see what this is,
Yeah.
What were your first connections with the Archie universe, I guess in comic form, that you can recall?
Oh, yeah, I can easily recall that. When I was 8, starting when I was 8, in elementary school, I would have to take speech therapy because I was a terrible stutterer, back then. And so every, 2 times a week, I would have to go to the speech therapist there in the school. And, other kids would be leaving as I was coming in for my session or whatnot. And I remember there was one time I came in and somebody had left behind an Archie digest.
Okay.
The little Archie digest, man. Mm-hmm. So I was just kind of like, you do the thing of like, you look around to see, are they going to come back for it? No, nobody's walking back real quick. Okay, well, I guess I'll just take it then. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, I took it and I must have read that thing to pieces. Because that was like the only comic book that I had for a while, unless my mom would buy me one from Winn-Dixie or whatnot. But man, I still remember a couple of the stories in there. Like there's one where Archie and I think Archie and Reggie, they were taking like one of the new students that was coming into the school and they were tricking him, like try to sell him some wolf tickets, right? Or they were saying, we have this game called Lower the Boom. You got to run down the hallway as fast as you can. That way you'll lower the boom. And the new student was like, okay. So he started running. He ran right into Mr. Weatherby. And Mr. Weatherby just looked like, young man, what are you doing? He was like, they told me to lower the boob. And, so Mr. Weatherby's doing the whole come here finger to Reggie and Archie, like, come here. But yeah, man, I remember loving that for like, however long I had that comic, man. It must have been months, you know what I mean? And, just the other day, like the other week, I was in the checkout line and saw an Archie digest, an Archie double digest, in the line at Publix in the little rack.
Okay.
By the chewing gum and stuff. And, so I'm like, oh, man. And so I picked it up and, was just flipping through it while I was waiting my turn. And, my daughters were with me. And they're like, Dad, what's that? It's like, this is Archie. This the Archie Comics. It's little comics. And, again, they had that disdain like my mama. Like for all they do, I could have been holding like a rotten perch or a fish or something. I guess. Like, come on. But yeah, man, those little digests in the regular Archie sized comics, the regular sized Archie comics, stuff is fun. That stuff is fun. I mean, if you even read through it now, it's just easy reading, almost like Golden Age books are. You know, it's not meant to be taxing. It's not meant to be terribly sophisticated. It's just good little cartoons. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's funny because the Archie comics and those characters, the Archie gang, that's got to be one of the longest running comics, in comics publishing history,
Yeah, certainly.
Going back, years and years and years. And for anybody who doesn't know, like, that was surprising to me that those characters have endured because, again, they endured through the silly, fun Silver Age into the over-the-top 80s, into the dark, gritty late 80s, dark, dour, the 90s.
Yeah.
And into modern day, and still are being published.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Almost intact. Certainly, some of the themes and some of the characters have been modernized and that sort of thing. But they're essentially, at their cores, at their nucleus, or nuclei, there
you go.
the same characters, and Archie Andrews was inspired partially, I forget who created the character, but was inspired by Andy Hardy.
I can see that, yeah, like Mickey Rooney, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh darn, the world is wonderful. There's no strife, there's no war, there's no violence or oppression or racism. Everything's, oh gosh darn, just that,
just very innocuous. Yes, very innocuous.
Yes, super harmless. And like when you think about it, it's like the longest running soap opera in history where it's all about the drama of the relationships between the characters and somebody's paired up with this person, but there's a jealous person over here because there's a love triangle, or there's someone who's trying to angle in, and the characters stay basically the same. I mean, in soap operas, obviously the actors age. Victor Newman's got to be like 80 years old now.
Yes.
And he's still on that show, whatever that show is.
Young and Restless. Yeah.
He's still on there. But they're kind of the same. They endure, and it's the same kinds of dynamics. As far as I know, I actually, have some friends who do still read Archie.
Yeah.
And they enjoy it, for, the modern takes on it and the contemporary takes on it. But the other thing I was going to ask you about, because I don't think you and I ever talked about it, or maybe you did when we interviewed Jaime Hernandez, but Archie had to have been an influence on Love and Rockets, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And in fact, I'm glad you brought that aspect up, because I was going to say, you know how, like, a long-running character will go through certain periods of a different artist. Like, for instance, like with Scrooge McDuck,
mm-hmm.
there's an instance where you could say, oh, there's the Carl Barks Scrooge McDuck. There's the Don Rosa
mm-hmm.
Scrooge McDuck. You know
mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? Such as it is with Archie, there's Bob Montana from the 40s, who initially drew Archie. And then you come into like the 50s and I believe all the way into the 70s, you have someone like Dan DeCarlo who draws Archie and who draws the definitive Betty and Veronica,
Right.
And then it just kind of becomes like, whoever can jump in and fill in, after that, you know what I'm saying? And then coming into like after the turn of the millennium, you have, guys like Norm Brayfogle and even Terry Austin working on those Archie books. And they look different. They even called them New Look because Brayfogle, rest in peace, the late Brayfogle, he was giving them a more realistic cartoon look, but it still had the hallmarks of those Archie characters. Like Archie still had the waffle iron, side, the fade.
Was he still wearing that sweater vest and that bow tie, yo?
Well, they kind of updated it for that, you know what I'm saying? But yeah. But yeah, it was kind of funny to see, like, Jughead, like, people don't realize, I don't know if anyone ever has realized, that's not a crown he's wearing. you cut a fedora and you turn up where you cut the fedora at to make it look like that, like a hat.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a crown. But yeah, stuff like that, to where the characters have been around so long, things like the Jughead thing, you might have to explain to a younger reader or a newer reader. It's like, why is he wearing that? What is that on his head? Or why is he always doing this? Or whatever like that. You know, so there are some conventions that could stand to be updated. But for the most part, yeah, a lot of those relationships within the comics are intact. And absolutely, getting back to your initial point, you know, definitely an influence on Jaime and by extension, you know, Hilbert as well, Beto, you know, because they read a lot of that stuff, you know, growing up, you know, and you have like those interpersonal relationships between the characters like that. So yeah, I could definitely see that.
I loved the fact that, I guess, as a contrast, you know, and you know, again, the Archie characters have been updated, you know, in modern day. They're not writing them like it's the 50s or 60s or the, you know, or the even the 70s or the 80s now. But I do like the fact that there is consistency. There is kind of a house style that has maintained, like you were saying. Dan DiCarlo does kind of like the definitive, you know, Betty and Veronica.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, you do have some people in there like Harry Lucy and George Freese, who did their versions as well. And then of course, I think Adam Hughes did a Betty and Veronica series here in modern day. But contrasting that against like Love and Rockets, where the conceit of that book being is that these characters age over the years. Yeah, you know, that 25 years in, they're not going to be 20 anymore. They're going to be in their mid 40s.
That's right.
30 years later, they're going to be in their 50s, you know, and so, you know, you do see these characters not sitting in stasis or, you know, sitting in amber, you know, preserved perfectly. No. They're moving forward and stepping forward, you know, like real life does, you know, to a great extent. So, yeah, I was thinking about that. I was like, did we bring that up when we talked to Jaime? Did he talk about?
I think he may have brought it up, you know, but perhaps not to the extent that we just discussed.
Okay.
But yeah, when he was talking about, you know, growing up, and you know, in the book, you know, The Art of Jaime Hernandez, they give a long, you know, thorough description of, like, you know, he talks about what he was reading coming up, and you know, those guys are just comics through and through. I mean, they loved everything. So going back to what you were saying about being true blue comic fan, that was definitely them, and it shows in the work. Definitely.
Got you. You're a 90s kid, man. What did you think when Shooter started Valiant and in 1991, and he announced that he had acquired, you know, the rights to, or the license or whatever, to some Gold Key characters?
Yes.
Magnus.
Yes.
Dr. Solar.
Yes.
And Turok.
Turok, that's right.
Turok, yeah. So now what did you think of those? Because I thought it was cool that they were trying to update those characters, but I didn't read those comics, so I don't know if it worked or not. Did it work?
Oh my man, you know what? Man, I'm laughing because, oh my God, them was some snooze fest. Like, those would be ones like,
okay, wow.
Man, oh my God, what the hell is going on? Jeez, come on. like it didn't even really improve until, like, okay, when he came out with Turok, that was good because Rags Morales, great artist. And that stuff kind of fit the tone of, like, okay, that's more of what I'm reading now, like the 90s stuff. Okay, you know, that's like on par with the Image stuff. But like Magnus Robot Fighter that was coming out then, no. And then they like put out classic Magnus Robot Fighter. You know, Valiant was reprinting some of those classic stories. It's like, oh my God. Oh, how can anybody read this stuff? What the hell? But even with those early Magnus Robot Fighters, the only high points for me were like, there was a couple of issues that Ernie Colon did. Like 2 issues that are really good. And then for Solar, Man of the Atom, you know, the only thing that was exciting was when because I think Barry Windsor Smith had a lot to do with kind of re-envisioning some of that, but he did only. I was so disappointed. Oh my god, I was so disappointed when I bought like the paperback for it, right? Because it was an all-black paperback. The outside, you could barely make out the radioactive sign. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah. Oh, man. And plus, it had the world's largest comic panel. The world's largest comic panel. Like, you have to take it out and unfold it. You know what I'm saying?
That's so 90s. Go ahead.
Yeah, man. So, I got the paperback of it. I was like, oh, shit. Here we go. And because I was expecting it to all be drawn by Barry Windsor Smith. You know what I'm saying? By this time, I knew who he was. BWS, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay. I open it up and it's like, whop, Don Perlin. What the hell? Bob Hall? What? You know, and you're just like, I know them from reading like old back issues of like Ghost Rider or, you know, Marvel Presents or something, but what the hell? Where's Barry Windsor Smith at? And he did like the backups for each of those issues.
Yeah.
Like he kind of did the origin backups, you know. And I was like, oh man, damn.
Yeah. He was kind of like the creative director for the company to some extent.
Yeah.
Because like you said, and for anyone unfamiliar with Windsor Smith's work, you know, he's a comic artist and a painter, but if he inked you, he had a heavy hand.
Oh, hell yeah.
He had a heavy hand. He was like anybody that you could think of in that way where, like, even when he inked Herb Trimpe on Machine Man.
Oh, it became...
I was like, damn, am I fucking with Machine Man now? Because this shit looks dope as fuck. Oh, my God. I am with it, sir.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I was shocked because I was like, man, Windsor Smith is Herb Trimpe. What? The dude who drew Hulk and Wolverine and Hulk and what else did Herb Trimpe do? I'm trying to even remember.
That's like all he really did for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, yo.
I was like thrown off, but I was just like, man, Windsor Smith is making this dude look like butter, yo, hot melted butter.
Yes.
They must have given Shooter and the publishers must have given him a shitload of money. You know, to be involved with that stuff. Because I remember that too. Yeah, I was like, you know, like wow, you know.
And I was gonna say one other thing in regards to that, just a little digression. It seemed like he had that same type of deal with a couple of other publishers then, like he had with Wildstorm. Wildstorm said, oh, we got Barry Windsor Smith, man. He's fresh off the Valiant stuff. Oh, man, can you do this crossover for us? And Barry Windsor Smith is like, yes, I shall do that. And he did. And when you read it, you're like, oh, Barry, come on, bruh. Come on. Did you even read the books before you started writing it, drawing it?
Yeah.
What the hell?
No.
And then
no.
Yeah. And then over at Malibu Comics, they took a chance over there too. They was like, yeah, come on over here, man. Come on. What you got? Okay, I'm going to do Room for y'all. Energy Vampire.
Yep.
And they're like, all right, come on, do it.
Yep.
And it's like, I like Room though. I ain't going to front. I like Room. But it's just funny how all of that started. His comeback of sorts was kind of like him doing that Valiant stuff because he had kind of stepped away from the industry. It looked like in the late 80s, you know what I mean? Like his height was right after Machine Man, and then he did a few other comics after that, like covers, and then nothing until like the very early 90s, maybe even 90, 91.
Now, speaking of digressions, when did Weapon X come out?
Oh, you're right. Weapon X was actually in 89-90 in Marvel Comic Presents. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and it was funny because, you know, he started in comics in the 70s doing Conan and kind of imitating Jack Kirby. And then he starts painting. Mm-hmm. And then he gets involved in making posters and art books and portfolios and that kind of thing. And really just being a professional fantasy fine artist, if you will. And then he, like you said, he kind of makes this kind of a slow trek back into comics again. You know, doing Valiant and then Malibu, and those covers were dope. Like all those Rune covers and stuff. I just remember being captivated by him. Like, he is going all in, yo. But anyway, as we bring it to a close, I did want to talk about how some of these characters have lived on into modernity or into modern day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, DC acquired the Charlton characters back in 1983, and then the Watchmen comic came out in 86. And then eventually, you know, we got a Watchmen movie. But later on, we did get HBO's Watchmen, which was great. In 2001, as far as the Archie characters are concerned, the Josie and the Pussycats movie came out.
That's right.
Didn't see it. But it was, you know, like starring Rosario Dawson
and Tara Reid.
Yeah, Tara Reid. And then in 2017, the Riverdale TV show debuted on the CW, which was a much more a darker, more brooding take on the Archie gang.
Yes.
And then in 2018, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which came, you know, a year later, came out on Netflix. And same thing, kind of a darker.
What's that?
If you can get darker with a witch, a darker, more brooding kind of a version of that as well. And both of them, you know, modernized.
No.
Well, go ahead. I'll go ahead. I'll give you the last word.
I was gonna say, like, you know, some characters just can't. Well, I won't say they can't be updated. Anything can be updated, but you can't just do a simple 180 on certain things. Like, you know, the Archie gang, you can't do a 180 and make them into like moody teenagers with some mystery. It's like, no, that's not the happening right there. You know, Sabrina, I can maybe see that because it says in the title, Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Yep.
But you can't go too gritty on her and too just dark. You know what I mean? You got to have some semblance of what made the character so appealing in the first place. And you can just maybe turn the dial just a couple of notches to to be more modern, but not so much that you forget what the character was. You know what I'm saying? I find that's what happens with a lot of these things. It's like they'll try to modernize the characters, but they do it so much that you lose the character itself, you know?
Well, I did get a chance to watch some of Riverdale and the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. And while they were darker, they still did keep that kind of earnestness at its core that we remember from the comics. It wasn't completely absent, but it was modernized, and it is a bit, you know, they are a bit more brooding and moody, like you said. But I think that's, you know, your reaction to it and probably mine too are largely because, you know, we lived with those characters for decades and decades, and we remember them a certain way, and we consider it a 180. But, you know, like you say, you know, some things, you know, they don't necessarily have to be modernized, but, you know, they can be. And these shows are successful from what I know. So, you know, maybe we're just outside the demographic.
That concludes this episode of Sidebar Forever, hosted by Dwight Clark, Swain Hunt, and Adrian Johnson. You can find us online at sidebarforever.com. Any emails or questions can be directed to us at sidebarforever@gmail.com. And also, subscribe to us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram.